very much. Thank you. It's a great honor to be here, to meet all these great people. It's been a blast so far. Just by show of hands, anybody here, has anybody seen one of my talks before, either live or on YouTube, or read one of my blog posts, anything? So that's what I was thinking, and the bad news is I couldn't think of anything interesting else to tell you. But luckily I came up with a way not to terribly bore you. And I ran across an activist, and that's actually one of the great benefits of my work. I get to meet all these great people all around the world, and especially you German people here might not know many of them. And one of these guys I really admire, and the organization is one of the most effective ones, is David Coman-Heedy from the Humane League of the United States. And I ran into him yesterday and found out he didn't have a speaking slot, and I was like, this is crazy, people have to get to know you. So our idea was to have a bit of a dialogue about the corporate outreach we do and the differences and where we agree and maybe where we don't agree. And so it's a very great pleasure to introduce David. So the Humane League, one of the main projects we are working on is getting rid of battery cages. So maybe David, looking at the different topics, we have many species suffering in factory farms. Meat reduction is a very important topic. Why is one of your priorities to focus on laying hens?
Sure, so this is probably a theme that you saw in many of the talks yesterday. We have a number of metrics, like many of the other groups who have been speaking, that we look at when we're choosing a campaign target. And those three things are the number of animals that are going to be impacted if we win the kind of institutional change we're looking for. That one's obvious. The second is the amount of suffering that's reduced. So is it a practice that if it's ended is just a very small amount of suffering, or is it something that will drastically change the life of an animal, like intensive confinement, like battery cages? And then finally is vulnerability. You know, there's many issues we wish we could campaign on, but we just don't quite seem there yet, where a victory doesn't seem like a possibility, where the companies aren't vulnerable on that issue. Battery cages, for us, are really in the sweet spot of a huge number of animals being impacted by a single policy change. Like in some of the larger victories, we're talking about tens of millions of animals each year being impacted. We're talking about a pretty serious reduction in the suffering that these animals go through in their day-to-day. And it's something where there's precedent set by some of the more progressive companies, like Whole Foods, for example, in the US was a grocer that went cage-free early on. There were a number of smaller institutions that went cage-free. So as we built up our victories, it seemed like more and more companies were vulnerable on this issue. So that's why we really focus on that. I know that you've been working on this issue as well. I'm curious to hear why that is and how you've been working on it.
Sure, so basically for the very same reasons, which I don't have to repeat, I think. And looking at what we've done so far, I think it's important to mention that it all started with our founder, Wolfgang Schindler. He was a lawyer, and he was able to convince the German Constitutional Court that battery cages are not constitutional and they had to be banned. And that was, while that was a huge victory for the hens, the egg industry got creative. So we had a ban. We knew the ban was common for barren battery cages and also for the EU enriched cages, but the egg industry invented a new sort of system, the colony cage, which is basically a much bigger cage with more hens in it. So we knew we had to keep on fighting against that, and then one of the major levers we found were the supermarket chains. And we managed to, having the ban coming into place and egg producers not knowing what to do, whether to go for these colony cages or whether to go cage-free, we opened a dialogue with the supermarket chains and said, hey, it's very important that you take a step right now and decide where you want to go. And obviously, we want you to go all cage-free. And so it's not only for the animals, you can also help the farmers, etc. While we don't care about that as much, it was certainly an argument they were very open to. And that helped actually getting all the supermarket chains on board. So they all basically, within a couple of months, stopped selling battery cage eggs. And we kept on rolling from there. We used the momentum to target noodle producers, like egg noodles are quite a big thing in Germany. And then we went through the food industry, like catering companies, etc. And so basically we are at the point right now where the big corporations have basically stopped using cage eggs in Germany. And while this is very impressive, it took us a couple of years. And on the other hand, I get emails from you guys all the time hearing about like huge victories in the last couple of months. Maybe you can talk to us a little bit about that.
Sure. So it's been really exciting in the U.S. Over the last year and really the last like 6 months or so. We've just seen this tipping point, this huge landslide of all the major players, all the major purchasers making cage-free commitments. Our first real major victory against like a multinational in the U.S. was Sodexo, the dining service company. So we actually went to retailers last. We found those to be the hardest to go after. So yeah, essentially every major player up through McDonald's and Walmart, when those companies switched, that was kind of seen as like the tipping point where we'd be able to leverage that against all the other companies out there. And I'm happy to talk about how we did that as well. So we essentially started on individual campuses, although it's interesting to hear that that's where you got your start as an activist. That's what I was doing 6 years ago, going door to door in college dorms in Boston, Massachusetts, getting individual dining halls to switch to cage-free. We did this for a number of years. We got about 110 campuses in cities all over the country to switch to cage-free, and at that point we decided to turn our sights to like the catering companies. There's a few major players, Sodexo, Aramark, Compass Group. They're in Europe as well. Actually, Sodexo we're meeting with next week in France where they're headquartered. And we decided that we wanted to start going after those major players and getting, if we can get one of them to make a policy that would impact their hundreds of accounts, so all the hospitals and colleges and other places where they have dining halls. So the first one that we got to make a 100% commitment was the 4th largest, a company called Delaware North. Then we got the 5th largest, Centerplate, and then we moved to Sodexo, the 3rd largest, and that was by far our biggest campaign. And we just led a very aggressive campus-based campaign where they had about 600 college campuses, and we'd reach out to students on every single one of them, get op-eds published, get them to gather signatures to end the contract with Sodexo. And this went on for 3 or 4 months, and every day we'd email updates to Sodexo executives saying, we're trying to end your contract here, here's what we're doing, we're writing op-eds, we're reaching out to the Alumni Association, asking them to speak up and end your contract. And just going day after day, making sure that they knew that we're active on hundreds of campuses. After they switched, Aramark switched 5 days later. Compass Group the next day made a commitment. Then we moved on next to the restaurant and manufacturing industries. So Cheesecake Factory was our next big campaign where we're doing demonstrations on weekend nights outside of the outdoor seating. Every weekend just ruining Friday and Saturday for them. We'd have dozens of volunteers call into those locations saying, I just drove past here, I'm really upset, my kids are crying, they saw the signs. We contacted all the malls. There's 380 malls that have Cheesecake Factories. We reached out to every one of them and said, you're at risk of a campaign. We're going to put up, here's a sample of a billboard that we put up saying that you support animal cruelty by having Cheesecake Factory. We reached out to the real estate companies that own the mall. We reached out to the major investors of Cheesecake Factory and so on and so on. And then we just moved down the list onto the next few restaurants and then finally to retailers. And I don't want to make this seem like this is just a THL thing. It's been, I think, a big part of the success is that it's a coalition. So it's us, the Humane Society of the United States, Mercy for Animals, Compassion World Farming. There's a whole slew of groups that are doing a mix of good cop and bad cop type approaches. So I know that you have a very different approach to our kind of relentless assault. I'm curious to hear about how you do it.
Sure, yeah, we always try to be as friendly as possible. That doesn't mean we never become unfriendly. However, so I think first of all, a big difference between the United States and Germany is that battery cages, in the public opinion, it was basically done. Everybody knew about it. I think that has only changed recently in the United States. Everybody was against it, and so it was very easy. We didn't have to do any convincing. Even the supermarket CEOs, they knew that it was bad. So that made it a lot easier, and we realized that we don't have to apply that much pressure. So we started to approach them in a very friendly way. The last supermarket chain, we actually had to tell them, back then I didn't really have a plan of what I was doing, so I realized the night before we launched our campaign I should tell them. It was already 9 p.m. or something. So I sent them an email tomorrow we're going to launch this campaign, and if you don't want us to launch it, tell us by tomorrow at 9 or something. You have 12 hours, the night. I realized it was stupid, but we had a big coalition and everybody was already set to launch the campaign. But they did call me the next morning and said, hey, have you checked your emails? And I hadn't, and I found a press release of them saying, hey, we're going CageFree. So. So even with that company, they were kind of thankful that we let them know beforehand, and they said, hey, you're a group we can work together with, and we should have meetings, etc., etc. And it has had quite a bit. Like right now, the supermarket chains are sending out positions on animal welfare issues, and they have us work with them in the background to get things done and implement our ideas. And I don't think that would be possible without the positive approach we're having. That being said, I think there are ways to kind of continuously engage with companies without like being friendly all the time, and that's probably what you have in mind, isn't it?
Yeah, we definitely have like corporate outreach staff who spend all their time essentially building relationships with these companies, staying in contact with them. But for us, it's a much more strategic role to kind of determine who next campaign targets will be. And I think one of the reasons that we're so focused on our really aggressive approach is that in kind of the ecosystem of groups in the US, there are already a number of folks full-time who are trying to build these kind of positive relationships and give encouragement and incentive to make changes towards animal welfare, towards better animal welfare. And we found that we can help accelerate those changes if we are just kind of this looming threat where there's both the carrot and the stick. The incentive is we can work with these friendlier, bigger groups who can give us awards and praise us as they deserve, with press releases and so on. And there's also a risk where if we don't do the right thing, if we don't do what other companies are doing and what we're being asked to do, we're at risk of having a Humane League or one of the other aggressive groups campaign against us. So we feel like we are best suited to, we also enjoy it, I'll admit, but we are best suited to kind of filling that niche of being a risk for companies that aren't willing to kind of step up and do the right thing. So yeah, it seems like we agree on a variety of approaches. I think the important thing is not to be dogmatic. There are times when we want to work in a friendly way with companies. These are all just tools, just like anything. Like doing aggressive campaigns are not always the right fit. So there are many companies where we don't end up doing that, where we just get a victory through dialogue or leave it to groups that are working in a more positive way. And I think it's really important that activists see the tools in front of them as just, a set of ideas of equal value, just with a different time and place. So yeah, that said, before we open to Q&A, I'm curious to hear what the next plans are for your group now that the CageFree issue seems to be winding down.
Sure. Well, let me first say, like EA people, when they learn something new, you probably know the vocabulary. They say they have an update. And one of my biggest updates was that in the past I used to think that our approach was the right one, and over time I've learned that there's so much value in these different approaches, like having groups that apply high pressure, having groups that in my view were too friendly. Like if you have the mix, it really can create some change that you couldn't create otherwise. So I think it's great to have the diversity in the movement, and I think something we should be happy about and not something we should fight about all the time. So talking about things I'm really excited about for the future, basically two things. One is that I've always wanted to work on fish issues, like factory farming underwater, basically aquaculture. It's always been like a high priority topic for me, but I never knew how to tackle it because in the public opinion, fish don't really play a big role. So I was able to use one of the good relationships we had with the supermarket chain to like say, hey, this is something we want to work about. Would you be interested in starting a project with us? And luckily they were. So we had our first two meetings, the first one at their offices, the second one at a fish supplier. And we're about to raise the bar for farmed fish. So it's really exciting because there are so many animals involved and huge amounts of suffering. So I'm really looking forward to that. The other thing I'm really excited about is us going international. We are looking especially at Poland right now because Poland has many great activists at the grassroots level. They're just starting to become more and more professional. And I think it would be a great addition to have a more experienced, well-funded group there to help further professionalize the movement. And this is something we are looking into right now and might take our first step either this year or next year. So David, what are your plans for the future?
Well, similarly, we are also going to be spreading internationally. So we've already got a few folks in Mexico working on these corporate campaigns. We've gotten the largest egg purchaser there, Grupo Bimbo, the largest bakery in the world, has made an international commitment on CageFree. We've gotten Burger King and a few other restaurants to do it as well. And because of that success and the success in the US, We're also going to be coming actually to Europe. Next week we're meeting with a variety of groups to essentially put on a training seminar to share some of these high impact tactics that we've developed in the US, learn from what groups here are doing, and we'll probably be hiring a few staffers in the region to help oversee what we hope will become global campaigns. So like I said, we're meeting with Sodexo next week. This is a perfect example. So Sodexo is this major multi-billion-dollar dining company. They have these contracts all around the world. They've already lost the campaign in the US. So essentially what we can do when we meet them is say we have this coalition of 10, 11 groups in all these areas of the world. They're signed on to do the exact same campaign that happened to you in the US unless you make a global commitment. And the idea is we can go after the companies in the same order that we did in the US to get global commitments and start pressuring more countries than where we're at. And Mondelez is another perfect example, an international manufacturer, and they haven't completed a global commitment yet, have they?
Actually, yeah, we worked together with you guys on that company, not with you directly, but with your colleagues.
Yes.
And it was when you talked about international campaigns that first came to mind, because it's always been something I wanted to work on. And we had overdone the friendliness thing with Mondelez. We were friendly for way too long, and we realized we really need to apply some pressure. And so we reached out to you guys because we thought it would be a great idea to have an international campaign. It's the third biggest food producer in the world, and they are all over the globe. So we thought it would be a great idea to have an international campaign. And you guys were totally open to it. Them having the headquarters in the US, you took on the negotiations. We did a petition together on change.org. They can, actually, if you have different petitions in different countries, you can have one counter, so they all add up. And we all we did our thing there, and the campaign was won within just a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks. It was a cool victory, and so that's the stuff I'm looking forward to you guys bringing over to Europe. And so Mondelez, they will not only go cage-free in the United States, they're in Canada, entire Europe, and other parts of the world over time. So that really shows what only 2 organizations can do, and I think if we can bring more organizations to the mix, we're going to see some huge, huge victories. So I think it's about time to open up for Q&A. Do you guys have any questions? Start right here.
Yeah, two questions. One, this change over to cage-free, there's not enough production of cage-free eggs to deal with the demand. So how are you guys working with producers to manage that? And then I don't know what kind of percentage of egg products can be alternatives like Hampton Creek that have plant-based alternatives, but are you working with those kinds of collaborations to offer them plant-based alternatives?
Can I start? So egg supply has really drastically changed in Germany. When the supermarket chains made their commitments, all the producers switched to cage-free systems. So we had a situation for about a year or so where supply was limited, cage-free supply. And I'm glad you mentioned the topic of plant-based alternatives. This is actually something we bring into the mix all the time when we talk to companies. We tell them, hey, cage-free is a good step forward, but going plant-based is the best thing you can do. And we actually recommend suppliers who have plant-based alternatives to eggs. So we have made some strides in that area too, mostly cage-free though, but some are going egg-free as well, which is great.
Yeah, regarding the supply issue, we actually, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, met with the United Egg Producers. So in the United States, that's essentially the lobbying group for the 150 largest egg producers in the country. And indeed, right now, cage-free egg production is just a few % of the market. So essentially, all of the companies are gearing up. I mean, the writing's on the wall. They were very clear. We get it. No one is going to be building more battery cage facilities. This is we understand that it's cage-free. They're just trying to mitigate their financial losses in having to do it in such a short timeline, essentially. But they made very clear that it will be happening. They're talking, I think largely with the Humane Society of the United States has put them in touch with many of the largest egg producers. And they're seeing the new farms that are being built. It's actually quite difficult to retrofit a battery cage barn into a cage-free barn. It's an entirely different set of equipment. And all the companies that make lots of cage-free equipment are actually in Europe. The companies that do it in the US are really small. So I imagine there's going to be a big shift in the industry essentially and seeing more of those companies come to the US. So it's going to be a very interesting next few years, but they definitely see the writing on the wall. They're kind of done resisting at this point. And I think in terms of the plant-based part of the conversation, one real big benefit is that as companies like Hampton Creek, who are creating these kind of plant-based Egg alternatives, 30% of the market in the US is liquid eggs or eggs that are used in products, not that you'd think of as an egg, but just in baked goods and so on. They can be replaced very easily with plants, like with what Hampton Creek is producing. So if we drive up the price point of these kind of like bulk liquid or baking eggs, it makes it much easier for companies like Hampton Creek to compete in like the manufacturing market, for example. So I see that as a big part of our work.
I mean, the way that you structure your work is great. I love the idea of just approaching businesses just like through your own corner shop, just being like, yo, get HBX. But what I was thinking was that we've got the vegan movement growing exponentially, and we're getting a lot of young vegans who within a month want to be an activist. And I think it's fair to say that your method, not in all cases, but maybe in places like America, Britain, Australia, for example, they see a lot of organizational, more strategic work. They're just kind of going around doing stuff. What's beneficial is though is that the younger generation, they have more access to internet and more IT equipment, etc. So they can do that on an online basis. And I see that working. So the same way that you ran Cheesecake Factory and were like, well, I'm an active more or less. You can do that online, and you can do it for no money, and you can get millions of people around the world to do it with you. And I see it moving that way. I just wanted to know what your thoughts were on that, and whether you're going to adopt that, or whether you think that we should be doing both and making sure people do the stuff to do it as well.
Yeah, I mean, our campaigns are largely done online, I would say. We do some things like demonstrations and kind of in-person activism, but we have a huge network of supporters online all around the world. So we do things like setting up websites, for example, where when you sign the petition, it sends from your email an email to the CEO of a company or like the top 5 people at a company. So we get tens of thousands of emails sent out in a few days. We partner with Change.org, who are a really great partner for activist groups, so I definitely get in touch with them if anyone here is interested in doing those kinds of campaigns. We actually have something called the Fast Action Network, where people can sign up, and a few times a week, these are people that are willing to take 5 or 10 minutes to complete some more complicated action. So call a helpline and complain about cage-free eggs, or do something, or you post on someone's Facebook wall. That's a very common tactic that we just like ruin social media with Twitter and Facebook for companies each day. So I think that I completely agree. It's unbelievable with what a little bit of money and a few people, what you can accumulate online in terms of pressure.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Our email list by now is 200,000 people. So yeah, it helps create pressure, and we rarely have to go on the streets, and usually online even works better than having protests.
Like even on sorry if I may just put you to that, even on YouTube, like people are more or less celebrities now just by putting the vanity online. So like when they come on, they're like, oh yeah, I'm vegan now, and they've got like 2 million followers or whatever. And like then they do someone trash like McDonald's, whatever, and everyone's like, oh, McDonald's is horrible, but they might not be vegan, but they're just conforming to it. I think it's great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, I would like to ask how you are working with companies who are splitting their production. In my experience, some companies splitting their production meat-free products and meat products. So they give some sausage, vegan sausage. Or in the fashion industry, for instance, there are some labels which have announced that they will produce vegan shoes and also shoes with leather. And if you're campaigning these industries, are you satisfied, and do you stop the campaign when the company is admitting, okay, we split the production, is that your goal? Or is your goal 100%?
So let me start by saying we're never satisfied. On the other hand, it's like taking a step-by-step approach, and there's a lot of controversy about whether or not it's a good thing that meat companies are going into the veg market. I think it's a great thing. First of all, they invest like millions of euros or dollars they have made with meats, and they don't reinvest it into meats. And growing their meat business, they invest it in veg alternatives. I think that's a great thing. They invest into marketing, making it more available to the mainstream audience. And having said that, I don't think we as vegans should totally support these companies all the time and buy their products. I think there's there are certain steps as an activist or as a human being, you just evolve, you continue to evolve, and they're the more or less ignorant meat eaters that get in touch with meat alternatives through meat companies. I think that's a great thing. And maybe after a while they'll learn that supporting more ethical businesses is even a better thing to do. So I think it's a step-by-step approach, and I think we're moving in the right direction. What are your thoughts?
The closest analog I can think of to your example in the fashion industry would be like Bon Appetit is the very progressive wing of Compass Group, the largest dining service company. So they tend to do things like way out there, like have Meatless Mondays before anyone else. They want CageFree way before anyone else. So I think that when you're just getting started on an issue, kind of getting those low-hanging fruit, even if it's just like a subdivision of a country, that's okay to kind of get your foot in the door. But later on, I mean, we leverage that against Compass Group, larger Compass Group, basically saying you admit you're right in your materials, that this is the right thing to do in your own materials. So it helped us in our later campaign. And our approach after that was, our director of campaigns, Aaron, in his office, just has like the industries, and he has the list of the top 50 or 100 companies in each industry, and he just crosses them out with a Sharpie one by one. It has to be the entire company, 100%. So once we had enough momentum, it was, no compromise on that.
Sorry, would you please just repeat your name and your organization?
Sure, my name is David Komen-Heidi, and the group is the Humane League.
Is what?
The Humane League.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Just scroll down your name.
Sure.
While David is writing, I'll take the next question.
Yeah, I was wondering, since I've been here, I've sort of noticed that you use the term cage-free for more ethical eggs. I don't really know if it works the same way in Europe and in America as well, but I know in Australia the only sort of ethical eggs are considered free range. I was wondering whether barn-laid eggs are also an issue here or not.
Absolutely. So we focus on going cage-free first because it's the step to free range and organic is usually in terms of prices. It's too much to ask for the first step. And then there are different studies showing limited benefits to free range. For instance, most hens won't even go outside if there's not proper shade, for instance. They're like very scared to go outside if there's no shade because they're afraid of air predators. So we usually, once we get them to go cage-free, we switch the topic and go for more plant-based stuff. So that's our strategy.
Yeah, I totally agree. It just seems like diminishing returns. Like you get such a benefit from cage-free, everything else much less, and then move on to other more important things.
Yeah, makes sense.
One more way?
I was wondering if you ever use the plant-based alternatives to eggs as a more kind of cost-efficient argument for companies to go completely egg-free rather than
Yeah, I think the best example of that is everyone here familiar with the company Hampton Creek that I've mentioned a few times now? They're a San Francisco kind of like food tech company. They've grown quite large and famous in the US in the last 2 years. And their first big product was like an egg-free mayonnaise, and they used a bunch of food scientists and chefs from the non-vegan world. They hired them, getting like the best people, and they found a yellow split pea protein that exactly chemically emulates what an egg does in mayonnaise, which you don't actually taste an egg in mayonnaise. It's just like a binding agent or an emulsifier or something like that. So yeah, it's cheaper than Hellmann's, the main brand that's used in catering. And we've worked with a large number of schools and catering companies to switch 100% of their mayonnaise, and other companies have done that as well, just on their own. So when things like that are possible, we absolutely recommend that. We actually have a few people whose full-time job is working with institutions to do that. Unfortunately, it's not really something you can aggressively campaign on, because it's not going to, animal cruelty riles up the public, but egg-free mayonnaise is not like a moral issue for most people yet. We'll get there.
Yeah, absolutely. Same here. Looking at the time, we probably only have time for one last question. However, David and I are going to be around, so you can ask us. And I know you have been trying to ask.
Okay, I've got a very specific question about dialogue with supermarkets. And it's about two strategies. First of all, we think it's more important to ban or to campaign against animal cruelty products, or to try to promote vegan products, introducing new vegan products. And secondly, does it make a difference where the vegan section in the supermarket is? I've been told that there's sometimes a separate area where all the vegan products are presented. Is it maybe more effective to put them among the meat products, or are the the egg products in order to convince people who are not vegan to maybe buy the alternative?
Yeah, so your first question, I came to the conclusion that it's not you do either that or that. I've learned that starting with CageFree eggs has really opened a lot of doors for us, especially with supermarket chains, and especially when we started around 2009. Like the vegan word was like a word you just wouldn't use. Like everybody was really scared. Like vegan options were not a thing at all. When I first talked to a supermarket chain about more vegetarian, we always use the term vegetarian stuff. It was kind of, I was nervous, and the person also kind of felt uncomfortable. But then he said, "Yeah, maybe we could try like looking into the vegan issue." I was surprised he used the vegan word, and we worked with them actually, and they did. But that wouldn't have been possible if we first hadn't built that good relationship, like showing that we are mainstream people. And like want to go step-by-step approach. If you had started with a vegan issue, no chance at all. So I think that complements each other well. In terms of product placement, we talk to supermarket chains about that a lot. They tell me when they put the vegetarian and vegan stuff in the meat section, sometimes people will complain, like meat eaters accidentally buy a vegan product and are a bit pissed off. However, that's basically what we want. So, that's what we always recommend. Also, I mean, it's a bit difficult to educate the vegans. They always want their own sections. They don't want to go where the meat is. They want to avoid that. But we try to tell them, hey, this is not the important thing. I think for you it's okay. I mean, you can handle it. Go to the meat section, grab the stuff there. It's more important to reach the meat eaters, and they won't go like, for instance, I'm not lactose intolerant or gluten. I have any problems with gluten, so I never check out that aisle at all. I just don't go there. So it's the same with meat eaters. I think they won't like head towards the vegan aisle. So I think it's important to place the stuff there.
Yeah, I totally agree. And in our experience, we've found that after a CageFree campaign ends, even though things have been pretty tense between us and a company, when we come to the table and they've made the release, we can kind of suggest like, hey, moving forward, we want to work together. We want to avoid another campaign. And we found that, for example, all the dining companies we worked with, many of the supermarket chains, their kind of commitment included a very broad animal welfare policy. So it wasn't just a CageFree commitment in many cases, like Compass Group, the dining service provider, Aramark and Sodexo, the major three. All of them in their commitments would mention we're going to expand our plant-based options. We're going to have more, like in their cafeterias where they have 10 different stations. They're creating new stations that are all vegetarian or vegan as options for schools. They included animal welfare stuff related to pigs and cows as well. For Aramark, slaughter methods for chickens or live shackling and dumping, things that have never been seen in policy before. So yeah, I agree. It's the slippery slope that they talk about a lot is very real.
Okay. Thank you very much, guys. This has been much more fun for me than having a model.